Welcome to Climate Emergencies, Ambition, Policy and Action. Thank you for attending. This is the first of one of our webinars, which is part of a series on housing decarbonisation in the North. Over the weeks, we're going to have other webinars. So this is our first one. We're going to have other webinars on asset management, green finance, retrofit, rural housing and resident engagement. So it's a really interesting series of events we've got coming up, and we're delighted to be able to be hosting these. It's part of our OurNorth Net Zero campaign, which is the combination of member engagement activity like this webinar and the other webinars that are following on in the next few weeks, and some policy activity where we're involved in influencing work. I do have to thank our partners for supporting us in this campaign, and that's Liverpool City Region Housing Associations, Halton Housing, Together Housing, 13 and Consortium Procurement, who are supporting all of this work. I just want to introduce everybody before we get going. So I'm Karen Brown, I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for the Northern Housing Consortium. Our speakers today are Dom Coggins, give us a wave, Dom. Jonathan Mullard from Bays, I think he's got his screen off. Dr. Nadine Andrews, we've got councillors Kevin Frey and Caroline Jackson and Kathy Beaton from Lancaster, hello. Sam Granger from 13. So we've got some really interesting speakers to talk to us today. We've got Liam there as well, who I'm sure you've all engaged with before. Do you want to say hello, Liam?
Hi, everyone.
Just a little bit of housekeeping. So all of our speakers have got a presentation to go through. We should only take about 15 minutes or so. I would ask all the delegates, if they can, to keep the screens and be muted while the presenters are talking. But if you can pose any questions into the Q&A function on Zoom, and me or Liam will be going through those as we're going through the presentations to ask the speakers at the end. If you want to ask your question yourself, if you press the raise your hand function, and we can bring you in and you can ask the question yourself. Otherwise, without any further ado, I'm going to go straight into our first presenter so we can make the most of the time we've got. So I think that's Dom. Dom's a political consultant for UK 100, which is a network of local governments focused on climate and clean energy, and he's going to discuss with us the work of UK 100 in supporting local governments. So Dom, can I hand over to you now?
Yeah, thanks Karen, and thanks Liam and the Northern Housing Consortium for organising. I'm just going to try and share my screen, so give me a second. It's actually not giving me the option to share my presentation.
Yeah, it's starting to work now.
Is it? Can you see?
I can see something.
I might have too many tabs open.
Yeah, we can see it now. Yeah.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Oh, hang on. Right, there we go. Excellent. Sorry about that. I find when I do these things, I'm normally asked to speak slowly because people have trouble understanding my accent, but I think I might get away with it on this call.
I think you're on safe ground today.
So just to briefly introduce myself, my name's Dom Goggins. I'm a consultant with UK 100. I'll introduce UK 100 in a second. Wearing a different hat, I run the all-party group for renewable and sustainable energy, and I'm a member of the Manchester Climate Change Board. So I've got a few interests here, but very pleased to represent UK 100. Briefly, as Karen outlined, we are a network of many different local and combined authorities that share a commitment to achieving net zero by 2050. We have members all across the country, including across the north, and we work with a number of different kind of partners to bring their experiences together and to help them all work towards that ambition. We have a number of different strands of work, but three big chunks of work that are relevant, I think, in this conversation are around sustainable finance, around climate emergency, and around clean air. I'm more than happy to follow up with some extra information on all of that and more if people are interested afterwards. is just an example of the kind of thing that we do. So last year we held an International Clean Air Summit. That's at City Hall in London. We had mayors and city leaders from all across the UK, together with the head of the NHS and with ministers, as well as the head of the WHO and mayors from around the world. That there is Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, who came together and shared commitment on clean air in our cities. So just a flavour of what we do there. There's a number of different ways we could talk about this, but just to kind of set the context, especially as first speaker, there's a couple of, I guess, strands that I'd like to explore. The first is around principle, a principle that we often hear reflected by our members, that net zero can't be achieved nationally without significant and coordinated action from local authorities. That's a direct quote from Judith Blake, the leader of Leeds City Council, who's one of our vice chairs and the chair of Core Cities. 280 local authorities have signalled their intent with climate emergency declarations. A number of others haven't gone that far, but have signalled a similar intent and have equivalent resolutions. The public supports strong action consistently on climate change and on air pollution, both at a national level and when you look at all of the insights that we've got at local level too. And another thing we hear from our members is how much net zero offers wider benefits. Or actually, there's another way to look at it, which is that if you deliver all the things that you're trying to deliver as a local authority to offer your communities better health, more happiness, better prosperity over the long term, then net zero is the end result, because there is a real triple bottom line on offer. So I guess that's just top line principle that we hear from our members, and it's something we try and reflect in our conversations with government and elsewhere. And then you've got the practicality. So there's a number of local and combined authorities within our membership that have some really eye-catching projects. I mean, these are just three that I've picked out, but there's loads more that you could focus on. So there are big ambitions around the country. Greater Manchester has a really strong science-based, Paris-aligned target of 2038 with carbon budgets to back it up and a 5-year plan to initiate delivery. There are a number of different examples of high-level ambition around the country, but this is one that has it's resonated with local and combined authorities across our membership. There are really creative partnerships, like a delivery partnership in Oxford to trial the world's first hybrid energy storage system for electric vehicle charging and low carbon heat networks. And there are lots of different examples of sustainable funding models. Again, innovative stuff in Bristol. I encourage you to check it out, City Leap project. And it'll be relevant to an awful lot of people on this call, particularly given it's focused on retrofit and building decarbonisation. But the features of all of the examples that you look at where significant progress is being made is that they have to be creative approaches, they have to be innovative approaches, and the reason for that is that we have a system that isn't really set up for anything else, and that's one of the things that UK 100 is working on quite significantly with our members over the course of the rest of this year. Obviously, it's intensified by coronavirus, but it was a big part of the plan anyway, because there is no national framework that really exists that properly enables and funds local ambitious action to decarbonise. That's a quote from the Committee on Climate Change about no standard approach for target setting or developing action plans at a local level. The same is true for funding. It's a really significant problem. And it's a common refrain from our members that they feel that when it comes to delivering net zero over the long term, they really have insufficient powers, and powers that are inconsistent across local and different combined authorities with different city deals. And where the powers do exist, the resources at their disposal are insufficient to be able to use those powers properly. So it's a mix of insufficient powers and insufficient resources that really inhibit local and combined authorities' ability to act over the long term in really, really ambitious, really decisive ways. And it amounts to a system that is structurally incapable of delivering net zero in its present form. We are, in a few weeks, going to publish a piece of research which we think is the most comprehensive analysis of the powers and the gaps available to local authorities and combined authorities in terms of delivering net zero that there's ever been in this country. And we're quite excited about the kind of debate that piece of work will be able to stimulate. It will be focused on the devolution white paper, but that's not the only decision point that's coming up, which is relevant in this area. There are an awful lot of them. You've obviously got a comprehensive spend review. Heard Jonathan's comment about just before we started about how things are ramping up in government in relation to considerations around the CSR. With the energy white paper is looming, and it's been looming for a while, but we expect to see something quite soon. The heating building strategy is coming. We've got the 6th carbon budget in December, and obviously we've got COP26 next year. So what we have in the next few weeks, months, and over the course of the next year are a series of really, really key decisions that will, I think, decide whether we as a country are able to deliver on our not just our ambition, but our legal requirement to deliver net zero by 2050, but specifically what powers and what resources local authorities have to be able to pursue that. So in that spirit, we've been working, we've set up a resilient recovery task force, because obviously COVID has changed and kind of supercharged this whole debate. You'll have seen calls to build back better from civil society, from business, from local government, reflected by ministers and reflected in Parliament. What the Resilient Recovery Task Force is about is effectively bringing together local leaders, and there's a series of mayors and local leaders that collectively represent about 25 million people. In the next week or so, they'll be finalising a declaration and a submission to government for the CSR before the deadline for submission on the 24th. I will make sure that both the powers work and the work of the Resilient Recovery Task Force are shared with anybody who's interested, and we'll certainly share it with the consortium to disseminate. But this task, I think, if it comes back to the core work of UK 100 at the moment, this task to kind of connect the collective experience, the collective sentiment and the collective ambitions of local and combined authorities to ministers, to national policy making, is one that we take incredibly seriously, and one we think that couldn't be more important in the context of the real decisions that are looming and that are facing government over the next few months, and the real opportunities that exist over the next year to drive this further up the agenda than it's ever been. And I think just if we look at the headline of this event of ambition, policy and action, all of those things are in play right now. So that's our focus. My details are on this presentation, and if you want to follow up afterwards, then we can. But hopefully that set the scene a little bit, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of the other speakers and to hearing the discussion that follows. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Dom. That was really interesting. I've got a question of my own, I suppose, before anyone else jumps in, in relation to the enforcement role of local authorities, and we know they have very stretched resources at the moment, but if, for instance, the government was to decide that we should have a mandatory band C, and that's mandatory for everyone, owner-occupiers, private rented sector, social sector, then do you think local authorities would have the role in enforcing that, and what would need to happen for that, or would we be looking at some sort of other regulatory body to monitor that, because it may be the thing that's necessary?
It's a good question. To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I think ultimately the principle from our point of view that should be shaping this is that mandates from national government are less helpful than a framework which enables local government to be able to set the standards that they feel is appropriate for the kind of socio-economic mix of the communities that they are responsible for serving. So I think yes would be the short answer to your question if the government does mandate it, but I think what we'd like to see is for that whole kind of sentiment to be flipped on its head, and for government to be looking much more at an environment which enables local authorities to take many more decisions and to raise revenue locally in order to be able to implement net zero in the way that is best for their local area. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I think it's a question of kind of the principle about the way these things are done and whether it enables long-term sustainable action rather than a specific decision that government might make.
Yeah. I mean, a few local authorities I've heard from a sort of thinking around the ideas of should there be council tax reductions for people who then choose to invest in their properties and that sort of thing. Is that something that you think is feasible? Do you know of any of your organisations that were thinking on that?
I don't actually, because I'm not kind of responsible for the sustainable financing strand of work, but I will take that question back and I'll get you a specific answer to it. I think what I've certainly heard in Manchester and elsewhere is a lot of frustration about the inability of local authorities and combined authorities to be able to make that kind of decision for themselves and incentivize local action in a way that can actually work locally. And in addition to incentives through reductions, I mean, hands are tied basically, because if local authority funding, ultimately, you come back to the last 10 years, and if local authority funding has been cut by an average of 49.1% across the whole country, one of the only ways you can raise revenue locally is council tax, then if that's the only lever you've got to incentivise, or one of the only levers you've got to incentivise people to do specific things to help you achieve net zero or help you decarbonise, but it's also the only way you've got of topping up the funds that you get from national government, then that's kind of not much of a choice that you're left with. I think one of the things that we're hearing, particularly from mayors of city regions where the city deal is a little, the devolution deal is a little bit more enhanced, is a frustration that the extra powers or the extra convening power that they have isn't combined with the ability to be able to raise revenues in ways that are anything other than massively innovative and require like really creative partnerships, which they currently don't really have the bandwidth to put together. That's certainly the frustration that we're hearing. But I mean, whether there are specific questions around council tax, I will take that away to the team. And I'm sorry I don't have the information.
No, it's fine. I've just heard a few mention it, but I didn't know whether it was feasible. We've just had a quick question come in as well from Gordon, who's asking about local authorities' role in coordinating across tenure, and this is something I know has come up quite a few times for us as well. So local authorities' role in bringing together housing associations and the private rented sector. So where you've got an estate that's got right to buy properties in the middle of it, or private rented sector. And it's something we've been looking at ourselves in terms of how we can improve areas across tenure and whose role that is and the coordinating role. So yeah. Is there anything?
Well, I think it's a really good question. And I think I'm not sure there is one way that, like one kind of specific way that all local authorities see themselves acting in this area. I know that some will see themselves as the convener, but I know that others will see themselves as responsible for kind of, for executing against the powers that they've got. And currently they don't really have the power, particularly in private rented sector, to require standards or anything like that. And they've got the power to require or enforce standards among their own housing stock. But, even in a city like Manchester, that's like 30% of the stock. So it's complicated because, you might, as a local authority, be able to bring everybody together and to play a convening role. But ultimately that power doesn't exist for you to require standards that best serve the population that you're elected by and that you're responsible to and you're accountable to. Which goes back to that piece of work that we've been doing to really analyse where the powers do exist across a range of different sectors. Housing is one of them. I'd love to be able to get some feedback on that work from the group that's present today and from the consortium more widely, because we think that it is a pretty good analysis of a serious amount of gaps, and like I said in the presentation, a system that kind of is structurally incapable of delivering at a national level, towards, like, tailored towards local needs as it currently stands. And I think that is one area that's one area where it really stands out. But what I would say is that where local authorities do have the powers and where there is some willingness to act, is kind of, it reinforces the point I was making about where the powers do exist, maybe the money's not there. Because if you look at, let's say, retrofit again in Manchester, if you're going to work on the energy efficiency of the house, of the local authority owned housing in, like, social housing in Manchester, then you're still looking at probably like £1 or £2 billion really to get it done properly. And like nationally, what's the latest provision? It's about £1 or £2 billion. So you've got one city there that's trying to work on its housing stock that doesn't have the resources to use the the small amount of power that it does have. And that's one of the, Manchester's one of the biggest economic centres in the whole country. So it's a big problem. The two things don't match up, certainly not in the experience of our members. So I'm sorry that was a bit of a rambling answer to that question, but I think it's kind of reflective of a system that could work a lot better than it does at the moment.
No, and it's a really timely to bring it up, because, like you said, we're coming up with a comprehensive spending review and budget, and we'll certainly be putting in our £2 for what we're calling a housing quality investment fund. So even if there can be partnership working on a voluntary basis, there's funding to back that up to achieve improvements at neighbourhood level. It's something we've been talking about for a long time, and so this is the time to be doing it, isn't it? So.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that done well will solve a very solvable problem in this country around fuel poverty. And I think actually when you're looking at the economic, we don't really know yet what the economic impact of COVID is going to be, but we know it's probably not going to be great. And we know that when we experience economic crises as a society, it tends to be the poorest people who lose out the most. So, it's obvious, and it's our experience in the past. So how do you best protect the people who are most vulnerable from falling deeper into poverty, or help to solve the problems that they face at the moment? And actually decent home standards and allowing local authorities and combined authorities to be able to require those standards or to deliver those standards, not only is it an appropriate use of powers and it will help us to achieve net zero, but probably more importantly than that, it will help to solve a very solvable area of the problem of poverty that we face in this country.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Dom. I'll try to keep us on time, so thank you so much for that. I'm going to bring in Jonathan next. Jonathan is Head of Planning and Devolution in the local climate and energy team at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And Jonathan's going to talk to us about leading on the delivery of integration and local energy policies into a range of departments and cross-government initiatives. So I think we can see your presentation coming up now, Jonathan. So,
thanks. Yes, if you can hear me. Yeah, I'm having to do this on my home computer because Bayes considers Zoom as malware. So excuse if there's any blips in this, but thanks, Liam, for getting up on the screen. Yes, I'm in the local climate and energy team in Bayes, and we've been doing a lot of work with local authorities who've declared climate emergencies over the last 18 months. I'm also doing quite a bit of work with the devolved administrations on growth deals and city deals. So we've got a lot of work going on across the UK on working towards net zero and generally decarbonisation. As you can see from the slide, tackling climate change and achieving net zero is a key government priority. The government feels it's a world leader in that area in cutting emissions between 1990 and 2017, and the government feels it's overachieved against the first and second carbon budgets, but we recognise there's quite a lot of action needed to meet the fourth and fifth carbon budgets. Importantly, the Committee on Climate Change will be advised on the sixth carbon budget this December, and that's the first discussion they'll be having since net zero was adopted by the government. So a key point for us in terms of climate policy and energy policy will be when the committee comes back with their views on where we're going forwards. Ahead of hosting COP26, which has been mentioned already, the big event that we're looking forward to in Glasgow next year, later this year, we'll be bringing forward new ambitions to reduce emissions across key sectors of the economy. So I'm working quite closely with our business energy colleagues on energy efficiency for small businesses, large businesses and other sectors of the economy. Importantly, in terms of what Dom was saying in relation to local authorities, we're going to be convening a COP26 UK Mayors and Regions Advisory Council, which will be meeting fairly soon. Hopefully not on the same day as UK 100's similar event, but we'll be engaging with local leaders from across the UK to engage communities, as I say, in the run up to COP. The government's very committed to making this a COP where communities are heavily involved, and obviously as a local climate and energy team, we're looking at ways in which we can facilitate that on the ground. So expect a lot more to come on COP, net zero, over the next few months. Really, we've got to work up to COP26, and I say the government is really committed to having local councils, local communities and organisations such as yourselves involved. So yeah, a lot more to come on that one. Liam, if we're going to transform the energy system, it's going to look quite differently if we're going to meet net zero. This is a slide I use from the UK Green Building Council all the time, because we're going away, as everybody knows, from a standard, fairly old-fashioned approach now of having a generator at one end of the wire and a consumer at the other. It's a very much more mixed and hopefully a more resilient approach to energy, one which, as I say, will help us meet net zero. I've been doing a lot of work with housing and local government department, and we're actually working on some design guides. There's a national design guide now for buildings, and there'll be some design codes coming out of that fairly soon, which I'm inputting into in terms of new building standards. And again, perhaps reflecting something Dom said earlier, it'll be proposals and guidelines for councils, which they can then adapt to their local circumstances. So we're going to give some government guidelines on renewable and sustainable architecture and energy associated with that, but it'll be up to local councils to adapt as necessary, as I say. So we're very much aware that we can't impose a one-size-fits-all across the whole of England, and certainly not across the whole of the UK in terms of where we're going forward. But as I say, there's a lot of work going on with my colleagues in MHCLG at the moment on design codes and design guides to do with buildings and energy, which I think will be quite interesting to you as an organisation when that comes out. So we're looking at a really different and radical approach to energy provision, to climate adaptation, and resilience in a general sense, whether it's resilience for communities or resilience for buildings and energy systems. The next slide, please. One of the things we're tackling or trying to tackle as BEIS is UK emissions. Obviously, if we're going to go to net zero, we've got to look at the emissions. And one of the biggest challenges for us is heating buildings and industry, which creates about 32% of total UK emissions. So tackling that side, heating issues, is going to be a real priority for us. And in the North East, I've been working quite closely with the Coal Authority We're looking at the water that's being geothermally heated in abandoned mine workings. Some of that water is at 25, 30 degrees C, and it's available obviously in ex-mining communities and areas. So Durham Coalfield particularly, we've got a lot of people in fuel poverty, just to give one example, and yet beneath those communities, previous generations of some of the families in those communities dug the mines, I say, which are now filled with water, which are now warmed up by the energy in the earth. We just need to link the two. So we're working quite closely with our colleagues in heat networks to try and put some proposals forward. And probably one of the first schemes that comes through will be Seaham Garden Village, which is new build. So that'll be relatively easy. I say in inverted commas, relatively easy, but relatively easy to take forward. We've got a bigger issue in terms of retrofit, which we'll know as a consortium. There's a real issue we need to tackle. But heating buildings, reducing the heat demand for buildings will make a huge difference to UK emissions overall. Transport's another issue which we'll be looking at, and how people move around will be increasingly important. And we've obviously seen the effects of coronavirus on reduced demand on transport, but there are some issues tied up there with energy, which we need to get to grips with fairly soon in terms of electrification of vehicles. So a big task for us. If you notice there, the public sector only represents 2% of UK emissions, which is always quite a shock to some people. It's homes, it's power, it's transport, it's business and industry that are big emitters. But actually what we see as really important is that the public sector can act as a lead. Ministers are very keen on the public sector leading by example. So that 2%, while being insignificant really in terms of the pie chart you've got before you, is really important in policy terms. And we are looking through some initiatives we've got forward to put in some money towards the public sector to test and pilot a number of proposals. Right, Liam, next one. Again, Dom mentioned this earlier. We've got a green economic recovery as a priority. The government intends to deliver a UK economy, which, as you can see from the screen, which is stronger, cleaner, more sustainable and more resilient. And all our ministers, certainly in Bays, see tackling climate change as an absolute priority. It's one of our top priorities for a department. And as you can see, we need to make sure that we've got concern for the environment at its heart. So a lot of work going on within government, within teams, certainly within my Directorate of Energy Efficiency and local. We're doing a huge amount of work and leading this agenda on the buildings and energy side. So a lot of work going on, and as we come through and we get the outcomes from the comprehensive spending review, I hope you'll be able to see where we're going in the broad terms at least, if not in terms of individual projects. Yes, funding, always asked about funding. Bays already provides a range of policy and financial support for low carbon projects. And the Green Recovery funding, which was announced over the summer, is estimated that it will include support for around 140,000 jobs. There's 1 billion allocated over the next year for a new public sector decarbonisation scheme. And you'll hear more about that in the coming months as my colleagues work up the details. There's a 2 billion for the Green Homes Grant, which has had a soft launch recently, and you'll be well aware of that. Which is aiming to upgrade more than 600,000 homes in England. As part of that Green Homes Grant, we've got a local authority delivery element, and there'll be a competition for about £20 million of that money to be spent before the end of this financial year. And we're also looking at 300 million which will be passported through the local energy hubs, which I'll talk about later. And I say details of this being worked up at the moment. So there's a lot of money being put by the government towards pilots, towards getting going as part of the Green Recovery. From your perspective, you'll also be quite interested to see there's a £50 million demonstrator project for decarbonisation of social housing. And that is very much a demonstrator project. The government's intention is to put a lot more money into social housing decarbonisation in the future. And how much comes out of that in the end will depend obviously on the spending review. But we've certainly got to focus on social housing now in government, alongside the essentially private sector work through the Green Homes grant. And I say we're also looking at public sector decarbonisation for public sector buildings. So we're hoping that councils pick that up quite actively, as I'm sure they will. We're working quite closely with a number of pilot authorities at the moment across England. So government's making an initial tranche of funding available, and it is initial funding, as I say, because the spending review will set out future funding over the next 3 years. So, but ministers are really keen to make a start now. They don't want to wait. So that's why money is going to be made available in this financial year to get on with some immediate projects. And for that, we're looking for local authorities who've got established delivery mechanisms. So, thanks. As I say, the local climate energy team's role, which I'm part of, is to support local enterprise partnerships, local authorities and communities to play a leading role in net zero and clean growth. We put about £20 million into the local energy programme, which has funded 5 energy hubs across England, an energy officer in each local enterprise partnership. And we're also putting quite a lot of effort into tools and resources. At the moment, I'm working quite closely with the Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol, who are working on a couple of projects for me. Quite recently, they finished some guidance on environment, energy and climate for groups putting together neighbourhood plans. So we've got some information online through the CSE website now on advice for neighbourhood planning groups. And we're also following that up now with some similar information on carbon budgeting for, oh, sorry, my phone, on carbon budgeting for parish councils and similar organisations. So we're putting a lot of effort into tools and resources, and I can give you a full list of that at a later date. I can circulate a full list of tools and resources we've got available. And obviously, as a team, we're also running the Rural Community Energy Fund, which has got quite a few options for support and help for local community groups. So we're doing quite a lot really in terms of tools and resources, local funding, energy strategies, and as I say, the local energy hubs. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I'm responsible for 2 northern energy hubs, the Northwest Energy Hub and the North East Yorkshire and Humber Energy Hub. So I'm quite intimately involved with what's going on in Northern England, and I actually live up here in Northumberland, so I'm well connected into the local activity. Thanks, Liam. Just as a final map really showing the location of the energy hubs across England, the North East Yorkshire and Humber Hub is hosted by Tees Valley Combined Authority, and the Northwest Hub is hosted by Liverpool Combined Authority. So we've got quite a reach really across Northern England. I'm also involved with the Borderlands Growth Deal, which is covering the northern part of my patch and southern Scotland. And we've been working through an energy and climate and decarbonisation plan this morning with them. So quite a lot going on in the area. Impossible for me to get it all into my 15 minutes of presentation, but hope that will generate a few questions. And as I say, I'm happy to circulate more information to the consortium as it emerges from government, and I can tell you a little bit more in detail about what we're planning. Obviously, at the moment, with the comprehensive spending review, lots of discussions going on internally, which I can't actually talk about in this presentation. But as I say, hopefully soon there'll be the opportunity to do that and to bring you more into the conversation. And that's our general contact email address if you want to get hold of us. Hopefully that was
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, sorry, I was
useful. I'm just very conscious that was a very quick run through what a whole government department is doing in the area you might be interested in.
Of summing up a massive amount of information there. And we have got some questions coming in, and you won't be surprised that we're going to ask you about funding first of all. And obviously there have been those recent announcements on funding through the summer statement, and we've got the Green Home Grant and the LAD competition. And I can tell you as a sector, we can't wait for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund to come on through to us. We've been waiting for that ever since we first heard about it.
Yes.
The questions we've got to ask you of all of those things are paying for, you know, individual properties, and while it's a lot of money, it's still fairly small scale. And what we're looking at here is a massive transformational shift to get housing to net zero, to meet those targets. So there's two things. There's how do we achieve that transformation, because it probably won't be through a Green Home Grant. And also the social housing sector always needs long-term certainty about its funding. Its business plans are over 30 years. So, and you mentioned at the start of your presentation that, you know, or I think Dom might have said it, that we don't have that long-term framework and trajectory. We don't have the milestones. And I appreciate it might intensify towards COP26, but there's two big connected issues there for you.
Yes. Long-term planning is something we always get asked about in government. Some of it's driven by the political cycle, so it's not something as officials we're always in control of. But the government is committed, as I've said from the presentation, to see this as a first start. We are looking at future funding. Certainly the discussions I've been involved with in government are about what comes after the next CSR, where are we going, what the long-term plan is. But as I said earlier, government really is keen on a green recovery from coronavirus, getting the economy back in action, and they want to ministers are very keen to put some money in now. Hence, the 200 million that will be going in for local authority delivery as part of the housing attack, if you like, on standards. So we need to improve things, we understand that, but ministers, I can't really repeat it enough, ministers are keen on a long-term strategy for tackling the problems we've got, and certainly we've got some really good information now on the way forward and what the options are, and I say those options are getting discussed during the comprehensive spending review. I'd really also pick up on Dom's point earlier, and I think it is going to be a really important report that they're producing in terms of what powers local authorities have to take action on climate change and decarbonisation issues generally. I think it'll be a really important document, as I say, which will be read with interest across Whitehall, certainly in our department. We work quite closely with UK 100, as you might expect, and we funded them for some initiatives ourselves. So we're looking forward to that report. And certainly the focus of our team is working very closely with local authorities. But at the moment, I can't say very much more.
No, I appreciate that.
About long-term funding. But just to say and reiterate, probably too heavily in this response, but we are looking at it. We do recognise it's an issue. And we certainly recognise the scale of the task. It's something our analysts have been looking at in quite a lot of detail over the last 18 months, really. What's the scale of the task? What can we do towards that? And as I say, our ministers have decided we need to take action now, put some money in to start things off, and then give us a bit of breathing space to see how we go forward.
Yeah. Okay. Just one more thing. You didn't mention, I think, the future home standard. I'm not sure you referred to it, but I think we're waiting for a government response to that to give some more clarity around new build.
You are indeed. And I work quite closely with MHCOG, so I'm aware that is still awaited. But at the moment, I can't say anything about timescales. Okay. I could say autumn, but then autumn in government terms is quite a movable feast. But suffice it to say, there's a lot of discussions going on between departments to finalise the approach.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I mean, there's so much going on, and I know a little bit about the work of the local energy hubs, and I know that there's a lot of work going on that we perhaps don't see all of the time. And the issue you talked about using mine water, I found fascinating, because I live about a mile away from where Seam Garden Village will be. So I'm
right.
really,
yes. Well.
So I think I agree, we're probably going to see a lot happening very quickly over the next 18 months to 2 years. I mean, would you agree that we'll see an increase in activity around this?
Oh, very much so. As I say, I've seen the plans for what we want to do just within our directorate, one of many directorates within BEIS, and we've got huge plans. And actually, we've expanded the team enormously. I think the size of the energy efficiency in local directorates has doubled since we've been in coronavirus and lockdown. So I don't think we'll ever get back in the office. I think there's nothing space for us all.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, we're putting resources in. We see it as a huge task. And certainly ministers and ourselves as officials think now is the time to move from discussions about policy to discussions about implementation and delivery.
Yes, and certainly I think I can say on behalf of the sector, there's certainly a willingness. It's just, you know, what to invest in and what decisions to take. It's not an issue of not willing to do it. So yeah. I keep saying it because I'm a bit hidebound by what I can tell you at this stage, but clarity and more resources will be coming. Whether they'll be at the scale you require, I can't say, but we are working on it, I think, is a general message. Jonathan, that was really interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation and your questions, and we'll share your details with people afterwards. But
yeah, as I say, I'm just conscious I've skipped through a lot in a very short time. So if anybody wants to contact me directly, although it just said local energy at BEIS at the end, if you just put jonathan.mullard@BEIS, you can swamp my inbox with...
You might regret that, but that's a really kind offer. Thank you very much.
No, certainly housing is one of the areas I'd like to do more work on. So I've been talking to Tracy about how we can work more closely together. So very happy to do that, and very happy to have further conversations with you.
Lovely. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't stay. I've got another call to dial into, but I hope that's been useful. As I say, email me if you'd like to continue the discussion.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Jonathan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. So I'll bring in our next speaker, and that's Nadine. Hi, Nadine. And while you're loading up your presentation, I'll just say that you're the team leader for housing and regeneration research at the Scottish Government. And Nadine's going to talk to us about climate-ready green buildings and infrastructure and interconnections in those policy areas and sustainability. So, and I can see your presentation's ready, so I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Nadine.
Great, okay, thanks. So yes, this is what I'm going to be doing in this presentation is showing a model which I actually developed for Architecture and Design Scotland for an event that they ran a couple months ago on designing for a changing climate. And the focus of the presentation is climate resilient communities. So I'll be explaining what I mean by that, and discussing some of the elements of the model, specifically interconnections between housing, social capital and human health and well-being. So, but just to explain a little bit about the model, so it draws on various Scotland-specific resources. So Scotland's National Performance Framework, which has outcomes and indicators specifically relating to resilient communities. Also outcomes on health and natural environment are relevant. And the model which I developed is also rooted in the MPF values of kindness, dignity and compassion. Now, I also drew on Adaptation Scotland's Climate Ready Places resource, which has a wealth of information, and Scotland's Climate Change Adaptation Programme 2019 to 24, which takes an outcomes-based approach and builds upon the community's outcome of the National Performance Framework. In Scottish Government, we've got the Resilience Division, drawn on some of their work, which defines resilient communities in terms of how well they can use their strengths to prevent, prepare for, respond to and recover from emergencies. And we also have a National Resilience Centre, which aims to ensure communities are prepared for natural hazards. The centre is also interested in the recovery phase. So you'll all be familiar with this wheel-shaped model, which seems to be, my presentation seems to be moving forward on its own. So yes, this kind of wheel-shaped model, which shows the various dimensions of a topic, as well as indicating performance within a dimension. And I've drawn on that to come up with this model. So this shows the key design features, if you like, of climate resilient communities. So in the center are the 4 temporal aspects of resilience: prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery from the direct and indirect impacts of climate change. Around the edge are core values of kindness, dignity, compassion, inclusion, and core principles of communities being engaged, empowered, enabled, and educated. And the segments show the key areas that contribute to climate resilience, which are a mix of factors to do with people and their natural and built environments. So the segments interrelate, but they're also embedded in larger systems beyond the community. Most of the segments should be self-explanatory, but just a word about some of them before I focus on housing and the connections with social capital and health. So health of natural environments. This would include diversity and abundance of plants and animals, air, water, and land quality. Could also include things around wildlife crime, supply of natural resources and ecosystem services. So this connects closely with human health and well-being, sustainable local economy, and the green buildings and infrastructure sections. Something on the self-sufficiency and the food, water, and energy security. So these are related but separate concepts in this model. So food, water, and energy security is about easy and affordable access to sufficient levels of nutritious food, clean water, and renewable or low carbon energy. Whereas self-sufficiency is about the extent to which a place can produce its own food and energy needs. And knowledge, planning, and decision making. So this would include local knowledge about a place, community emergency planning, and community decision-making processes. So moving to housing, the climate resilient buildings, streets, and infrastructure section. So this would include everything to do with flood risk management, land and water management, including permeable surfaces, sustainable urban drainage systems, retrofit, new building design, green infrastructure, and green streets. So housing standards can affect human health, and the design of housing, streets, and public spaces can facilitate or hinder social capital, can affect the health of natural environments, for example, air quality, as well as support food, water, and energy security and self-sufficiency. Building materials and processes also impact on natural environments through resource extraction and pollution. And the work of making our homes and buildings climate ready can support a local economy, creating jobs and making a place more desirable to live and work in. The involvement of local people in the planning and design of, for example, communal gardens and green streets, drawing on local knowledge, can enhance social capital and well-being, as well as lead to higher quality gardens and streets that are well used and cared for. And we also know that sense of home affects health and well-being, and there's some good research that's been done around that in Scotland. But what I want to show with this model is that housing should be considered not just in the context of streets and infrastructure, but also in relation to the other segments in the model. So social capital. So this is a crucial element of community resilience, but is one that is often not thought about as much in climate adaptation as infrastructure and built and natural environment. So social capital in the National Performance Framework is understood in terms of social networks, social participation, community cohesion, and community empowerment. And there are a range of indicators, 18 in all, that together give insight into the nature and level of social capital in Scotland, which we can analyse at a national and local authority level using data from the Scottish Household Survey. We can also analyse the data in terms of population characteristics such as ethnicity, disability, age, and geographical characteristics such as urban-rural classification and index of multiple deprivation. But what's clear from all of these analyses that we do is the importance of looking at local context, because there can be such large variations in characteristics within a local authority area. There was some research coming out of Bristol, for example, which suggested that people living in streets with heavy traffic have fewer connections with their neighbours than people that live in streets with lighter traffic. And now, of course, it's vital to understand the effect that COVID-19 and policy responses to the pandemic is having on social capital. Clearly, in terms of physical spaces to meet up and socialise, we also need to be thinking about designing neighbourhoods that enable socialising at a distance, housing with access to gardens and nearby green and blue spaces, and digital access is now also a critical consideration, which would then link social capital to the access to services, facilities and utilities segment of the model. So, looking at human health and well-being, well, the relationship between climate change and human health and well-being goes in both directions. The impacts of climate change can affect health and well-being, but our state of health and well-being affects our ability to cope with the impacts of climate change. And there's lots of evidence about health impacts and the range of factors like poverty, age, ethnicity and gender, and pre-existing health conditions that influence health outcomes. From a housing perspective, in addition to impacts of flooding on communities, we'd be thinking about the effects of urban heat islands and overheating of homes, particularly for the elderly who find it more difficult to regulate their body temperature, heat-related death and disease, and heat-related violence and domestic violence. Wildfires and photochemical smog affect indoor air quality, and of course there's also increased risk of food, water and vector-borne diseases. Poor physical health can impact on mental health and well-being. And mental well-being is defined by the World Health Organization as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And the Scottish Government recognises that mental health is a major determinant of overall health. And one of the groups more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are people with pre-existing mental health conditions. For Scotland, it's estimated that 1 in 3 people in any year are affected by mental health problems. That's a figure that's from before the COVID pandemic. 1 in 3. I don't know what the figures are for England, but yeah. So there's global evidence that natural disasters can cause post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, and suicidality. The World Health Organization estimates that 30 to 50% of populations affected by natural disasters will experience moderate to severe psychological distress. And research from the USA suggests that many of these people suffer lasting depression. Research in Scotland into the impacts of severe floods during the winter of 2015 to 16 reveals a high degree of variation in how people were affected by the flooding and its aftermath, and in how they coped and recovered. There was a 3-year study of communities in Aberdeenshire which found both short and longer term impacts on health and well-being for some people. For some, the strongest impact was in the months immediately after flooding. For others, it was on returning home after temporary accommodation. And the groups that were more vulnerable to long-term negative impacts were children, older people, especially the frail elderly, those living alone, and those with pre-existing stressful life events or pre-existing medical conditions. I did some analysis of the Scottish Flood Forum questionnaires, which were filled out by residents of that same flooding event. Most of whom had not yet had all their flood repairs finished. And we know from that analysis that the flood and its aftermath increased stress levels for many, affecting their home life and personal relationships in particular, with symptoms including anxiety, tiredness, sleeplessness, feeling low, feeling overwhelmed. The main causes of distress included delay in moving back home, staying in temporary accommodation, and dealing with builders. Most of the survey respondents did not seek help. Some reported using a variety of stress management activities, most commonly friends and family support. And reasons given for not seeking help included embarrassment, a view that they should just get on with it, or a belief that their problems would ease once their house was sorted. Most of the survey respondents that were negatively affected by the flood had pre-existing mental well-being problems, and it's likely that these problems were exacerbated by their flood experience. So just something on specifically on mental health and well-being in relation to climate and ecological crisis. So several studies have found that a large proportion of people in the UK were at the time of the study experiencing stress and worry, which is often termed eco-anxiety. These were studies which were conducted pre-COVID. Around a third of adults in the UK felt highly stressed, anxious or overwhelmed because of the climate emergency, with slightly higher figures for young people aged 16 to 24. We know from psychotherapists that rising levels of eco-anxiety among children is going on. This is all pre-COVID, as I say. And BBC Newsround found around 3/4 of 8 to 16-year-olds were worried about the state of the planet, with a quarter very worried. One thing I want to say about this, as someone who's done a lot of work around the psychology of environmental behaviour, is that feelings like worry and sadness and anxiety are appropriate responses to climate and ecological crisis. The question is how people can regulate these difficult emotions in a way that's healthy and that motivates positive action in the context of other ongoing stressful situations, such as the COVID pandemic. But I also want to say that positive outcomes can arise from traumatic and stressful events. And as we see in the work on transformational resilience, particularly in the US, and transformational resilience happens when individuals and communities draw on their strengths and use adversity as a catalyst to find new meaning and direction and hope in life. And they make decisions that increase their personal, social and environmental well-being above previous levels. So this is related to concepts in health around adversity-based growth. Connection with nature. So it's well established that a sense of connectedness with nature contributes to human health and well-being. It also helps build a sense of place and community associated with pro-environmental behaviours as well. But the quality of green and blue space is an important factor, not just whether they're within easy reach of people's homes. So we can see here interconnections between the building, streets and infrastructure parts of the model, human health and well-being, health of natural environment and access to facilities. The importance of connection with nature has been a topic that's been much discussed during the pandemic, as well as the huge amounts of litter that have been left in some natural places. Natural England has a People in Nature survey, and you can sign up for monthly releases there if you're interested. And ONS has been analysing access to green space during the pandemic. So finally, I want to say something about indoor air quality. So air quality indoors can actually be worse than outdoors due to outdoor pollution penetrating buildings and adding to indoor sources of pollutants. Indoor air may contain over 900 chemical, particulate and biological materials with potential health effects. The main sources of pollutants include furniture and materials, consumer products such as electrical goods, cleaning products, air fresheners, pesticides, heating and cooking, wood smoke, tobacco smoke, pets, dust mite feces, human and animal respiration, and outdoor air, as I said. And recent studies have found that domestic wood burning is the UK's largest single source of PM 2.5 emissions, which are arguably the most hazardous type of air pollutant to health, because they're small enough to get not only into the lungs, but also into the bloodstream and through nerves into the brain. Air pollution can cause acute and chronic harm to every organ and virtually every cell in the human body. Heart and lung disease, dementia, strokes and reduced intelligence, liver problems, diabetes, kidney and bladder cancer, brittle bones and damaged skin, reduced fertility, miscarriage, low birth weight, infant health problems. We've also found pollutants in the placenta affecting fetuses, got sick building syndrome, and it also affects your health. Concentrations of formaldehyde and VOCs have been found to be highest in newer homes post-1990, which could be due to stronger sources of pollutants and or lower ventilation rates. A DCLG commissioned study of new homes found that only a very small number of both natural ventilated and mechanical extract homes met the minimum recommended ventilation standards. And 60% of that sample in that study exceeded recommended levels of the VOCs. Some studies show that higher SAP ratings are associated with a higher prevalence of asthma, which could be due to insufficient ventilation. There was a study in Wales of over 9,000 properties, which found a substantial decrease in the number of hospital admissions for those living in improved homes. And it was the damp removal improvements by use of extractor fans that was thought to be an important mechanism behind many of the reduced admissions. However, there's also evidence of increased condensation after retrofitting, even when ventilation is installed. So this highlights the important role of occupant behaviour, specifically in relation to ventilation, in influencing these outcomes. Okay, so just returning to the model and summing up. So really we can think of resilience and climate resilience in communities as an emergent property. So the state of each segment and how the segments interact with each other determines what the resilience of that community will be at any point in time. So it's a dynamic system. Interactions between segments can happen in ways that enhance each other, where you get synergies and co-benefits. Or they can happen in ways that conflict with each other, where we have trade-offs and maladaptation. And a key question from a housing perspective then is to how are you to design housing policies and interventions that take these other aspects into account, so that synergies and co-benefits are created and unintended negative outcomes in other areas can be avoided. So that's the end of my presentation, which I hope you've found interesting.
Thanks, Nadine. That was really interesting, and some parts of it were slightly terrifying, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I've never heard the term eco-anxiety before, but I'll decide I've got that now that I know about it. So as opposed to on the last point you just made about how all of that can influence housing policy and where to start with it, and I'm thinking about, I think Jonathan made the point in his presentation about design guides, and so what level of involvement have you been able to have in influencing it from planning and design and right at the outset of how communities are built? Is this research feeding into that?
Well, I hope so. I mean, this was, so I kind of came up with this model a few months ago in May, and so there's, which is actually why I was invited to present here now. And so there has been some interest within Scottish Government from some policy colleagues in other areas, so not outside of housing, which is interesting. And yeah, so what I didn't do with this presentation, because it wasn't so relevant, was to show all the evidence, you know, which is Scotland kind of specific. But the main thing really is about how models like this can just convey visually all the different areas that need to be thought about. So even if you're not actually, even if a policy doesn't actually work across all those areas, at least you're thinking about the other areas. And so, yeah, I mean, we're with conversations at the moment within Scottish Government around housing policy. We've got Housing to 2040 strategy, and you know, so it's kind of feeding in to these things. But there's so many. I'm at a national level where there's obviously lots of different policies being developed at the moment. The situation at a local authority level and, you know, on a community level is a different way, but still it's worthwhile, I think, to think about how the different types of interactions.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've just had a question come in, if we can finish on this. So someone's asking about the cause of eco-anxiety, and is it a lack of understanding of the issues, and what actions can individuals take, or is there a centralised role for public services to take?
So yes, I also I'm quite heavily involved with the Climate Psychology Alliance, which is a voluntary organisation. And so, and from my own research as well, that what we know about climate anxiety is that it's not. It generally doesn't come from a place of ignorance. It actually comes from a place of actually facing up to the reality of the situation and actually confronting the facts. Because once you, if you're in a state of denial is a way to avoid anxiety. But once you actually truly look at the situation, you understand the science and what the implications of the science is, you understand the size of the threat and the nature of the threat. And inevitably, once you accept the facts, that creates stress, because stress is just a response to threat. And so with stress comes feelings of anxiety, sadness, things around loss, grief, anger, fear, so these are natural responses to any kind of threat. And for sure, the climate emergency that's why we're, it's labeled climate emergency.
Nadine, I'm going to have to cut this far too short. I think we could talk about that for quite a long time, couldn't we?
That's
so
fine.
We've still got a couple of more speakers, so thank you very much. And that visual model was really useful, and I'm sure we'll all be looking at that, because that encapsulates everything on that model, so that's really helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very much. I'll move straight on to, we've got a team now from Lancaster City Council. We've got Councillor Kevin Frey, Caroline Jackson and Kathy Beaton, who's the Housing Strategy Officer, and they're going to talk to us about their work following the declaration of their climate emergency. Kevin, are you going first?
I am, yes. Thank you. So, yes, actually my eco-anxiety has been rising all day, because I've heard far too many people talking about working towards targets of 2050, when even if we stopped all our carbon emissions tomorrow, we'd have a decade of rises. And actually we need to get back to a safe level, which at the very worst is 350 parts per million of carbon, when we're currently heading for 410. So one of the things about this movement to declare a climate emergency is the ambition of councils, and out of the 280 odd, it depends whether you count combined authorities or not, that have declared a climate emergency, the vast majority of us have set a target of 2030. Certainly for our own emissions, because we have control of those, and even if there is no government action, we think we can do that. It'll cost us money, but we can build the renewable energy sources that we need. We can switch our transport and do other things that will reduce our carbon emissions. But actually, of course, that's only a small fraction of the emissions of, in our case, Lancaster District. So the bulk of our effort has to focus on the levers that we have, the influence that we have, the respect that we have of the whole population. And that actually, the respect we have has actually risen during COVID. A lot of councils have really stepped up, treated it as the emergency that it is, and have done lots of things like supporting food banks and vulnerable people. And that's going to help as we engage people in a wider conversation about the climate emergency that has not gone away, far from it. I'm talking to you from a passive house. I live at Lancaster Co-Housing, and we built 41 houses to passive house standard a few years ago, at least 8 years ago. It was the biggest development of passive house in this country at the time. But it's not just about the houses, it's about the integrated renewable energy. So we have a private wire network fed by a community-owned hydro and community-owned solar PV. So it's a very holistic approach, and I'm pleased to say that we've had government visits from high-level ministers who have gone away and looked seriously at changing government policy. That was the Isle of Man government, by the way, who were very serious about building passive houses. And you're going to hear from Kathy a bit later on about the projects that are following on from the co-housing development, the skills that we developed, the experience that we developed. People are going on now to build community-owned and affordable housing next door to us. So I just want to share my screen with you, just getting back to talking about, let me just see if I can do this. Let's have a look. Yep, that's that one. So talking about that holistic approach, we have brought together our priorities of climate emergency, community wealth building, and community engagement. Because as I said, the climate emergency, we can only do a very small amount on our own as a council. And you'll see there, these are our priorities that we're working on very hard, and we are trying to make sure that, in fact, you know, our senior officers are on board, but we have to make sure that these are embedded across the whole council. And on a call this morning, somebody told an anecdote about a council in the northwest that they're working with, who are looking at building a solar farm, and said, oh, we could also put solar panels on the homes of our council houses. And then they discovered, that one department discovered, that the housing department had already instigated a roof replacement programme, and not thought about putting solar panels on the roof. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody by saying who that was, but it just really emphasises the need for these to be shared priorities across the council, and then of course across the whole district. It's got to be joined up. We've got to address the climate emergency, but we've also got to build the skills in our local economy, and we're discovering that need with the Green Homes Grant, because that is going to depend heavily on skilled tradespeople to do that work. And as far as I'm aware, there just simply are not the skilled people to enable householders and local authorities to spend that money by the deadline of next March. So I'm not going to say very much more, because I'm going to pass you on to the people who are doing things more on the ground. This is the overarching plan priorities that we're working to. I'll just pick out one or two of the things. Procurement is something that we have huge influence over, and we can not only set an example with our own procurement, but we can also then encourage other public institutions and businesses to do the same. You'll see that under Healthy Happy Communities, the needs of people of all incomes to make sure that they're comfortable, warm, and able to maintain their independence are embedded in that as well. So, you know, the things that we do to upgrade our housing stock obviously have really good outcomes for people in fuel poverty as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. As you've done a nice segue there into Caroline telling us about the housing side of things. So thanks very much, Caroline.
Thank you for asking me to be part of this. Just busy trying to find the 7 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever I've got to make sure I don't run over. I'm the housing portfolio holder. And so what I'm doing is working within the areas that Kevin has outlined as our ambitions, our overall ambitions. We had just come to the end of our housing strategy, so we're in the process of creating the new home strategy, and that will have, let's say, a lot more policy than I guess previously, which is recognizing the climate crisis. For the moment, I guess our policy is very simple. Whatever we're doing is intended to get us to reach towards having carbon neutral housing. So we're working simply by saying, well, what are the areas we can influence as a council? Where can we work? And they are limited, as it was pointed out before. But even within those limitations, we have to be selective, because we want to hit as many things as possible. It isn't just about the energy standard of the housing, it's about what it contributes to the other things we're aiming at, our other ambitions as a council. And I mean, Dr. Andrews did make it very clear how well housing relates to so many other areas of people's lives. And that's what we want to do as we carry out the kinds of activity that we're planning. The first thing I'd mention is that we are probably a bit behind many other people in not having a local authority trading company. But one of the things we realised right away is we need to have more freedom to act than we can do just within the HRA. We have about 3,000 houses, our own housing. But in creating new housing, we want to be able to make partnerships and do things differently. So we require an LA trading company. We've hovered around the edges of it for a couple of years, but now I think under the impetus of housing and our ambitions, that's going to happen hopefully by the new year. So that's the first thing. Then if I just go through there's kind of 4 areas of action. The first of them is our own housing stock. We have, as I said, about 3,000 houses, some of whom really need urgent attention because they're below a C in terms of their energy efficiency, and many others where we just need to understand them in order to make sure that we can do a whole process of retrofit. So one of the actions we've already taken is piloting retrofitting on a couple of our typical council houses, which has allowed us to find out what the particular problems we have are in our particular housing stock, the costs, and indeed, as Kevin mentioned, our needs for skilled contractors. And we have begun to identify those and identify the lack and need. So that's a piloting. We're going to look at changing our maintenance schedule so that we include retrofitting, which hasn't been part of it before. So that may mean people don't get their kitchens and bathrooms replaced as often. So there's going to be quite a discussion to be had with our tenants. Not a trade-off, I hope, more of an understanding and an agreement between us. So that's housing that is, or we already have, which is a big project. There's also a possibility of new housing. We have an area where we need to possibly demolish and rebuild. We're well into the local engagement about that. Ultimately, that's going to give us a big opportunity to create, hopefully, housing at a passive house standard, and that is in an area which has many poor outcomes for the community. And what we're really interested in there is creating a community that will be healthier and happier and will be contributing in quite a different way to the district. So but we're hitting more than one of our ambitions. Then moving on from this housing that we have, we are planning to do some acquisitions, and this is where the LA Trading Company will come in. We have an area of very poorly performing housing, which is largely privately owned, private lets, and quite an unhappy place in many ways. So what we're looking to do there is to make acquisitions as a council, to retrofit to a high standard, and to involve our community in doing it. So we're both upskilling them, and we are making real difference, hoping to make a real difference to the commitment of people to live in that area, because the tendency is to not want to live there. And what we want is people to be committed to staying there and creating a better community within this housing that has been improved. So, and the final thing is we have some land of our own within an area that's just got an SPD, and we're hoping to build a range of tenure housing there, some to sell, some for shared ownership, some for us to let. Partly we want to do this to prove to the people who are about to build private housing in some of the other large developments that have been agreed in our new local plan. We want them to see that it is viable to build houses to passive house standard, that you can sell them, that people do like to live in them, because that's one way forward with developers pressing on them that it's possible to do. If we can do it, they can do it. And so that's another of our real ambitions, is to get whatever new housing is built to a high standard. So I'm going to hand over now to Kathy.
Yeah, that was really useful. Kathy, you're going to tell us about a couple of the projects?
I am. So I'm just going to pop a presentation up, just a few slides. Hopefully that's come through okay. Yeah, I'm Kathy Beaton. I'm the Housing Strategy Lead at Lancaster City Council, and the final bit of the presentation today is to talk about the work that we've done to support and develop community-led housing. I'll try and run through these as quick as I can, because I'm conscious that we need to stay on time. So community-led housing, three main aims that are cited on the slide there. It's a great way of solving local housing problems. It's a great opportunity to create and increase the supply of affordable housing, and experience shows it establishes and encourages strong communities. I think it's worth pointing out that whilst community-led is a growing sector, and it may be small in scale, but certainly for Lancaster City Council, these are strategically important schemes that are going to contribute directly to the climate change agenda. So where did our journey start? Well, for me, the journey started in 2016-17 because out of the blue, Lancaster City Council got an award of Community Housing Fund. We didn't bid for it. It was a government formula that was intended to recognise the impact of second homes ownership in each district. So our allocation was just over 700,000, and there were a number of processes that we put in place to try and establish a framework for community-led housing. So two things that we did fairly quickly were to set up a dedicated officer post so that we would have somebody that would work with communities. And we also established a grant policy. The grant policy was sort of phased into four different categories. So that was helping groups become incorporated, looking at feasibility funding to get to look whether schemes were deliverable, funding for pre-development costs. And although we didn't really expect to be able to do it, we also caveated a contribution towards capital costs. Another thing that we did with our allocation was to contribute to the first year's funding to create a community-led enabling hub with our neighbours in Cumbria. That was work that was already evolving, but they invited Lancaster to join in that grouping. So we took advantage of that opportunity, so that going forward, there is a self-sustaining enabling hub that our residents can potentially tap into. What we've also used the funding to develop are two very important community-led schemes. So Kevin's already alluded to the fact that in Lancaster we are fortunate because before we got our allocation we already had a community-led scheme which is called Lancaster Co-Housing. It sits in a rural settlement called Holton, and it's on the banks of the River Lune. As I've just said, the scheme was handed over around about the end of 2012. As Kevin said before, it's 41 outright sale units, comprising 1, 2 and 3 bedroom properties, individual homes, but very much in a communal setting with a range of facilities that the residents can tap into, but there is an underlying expectation that it's mutually supportive within the core housing scheme. Adjacent to the residential element is Holton Mill. That is, again, an important community hub and provides managed workspaces, so a really nice, distinct community already. In terms of the co-housing scheme, it's got its own district heating system, and as Kevin said before, there's electricity generation as well, and all the housing meets Passive House accreditation. So I was in a very fortunate position when we got our allocation of funding, because the group, the existing Lancaster Co-Housing Group, were already thinking about ways in which they might be able to expand their current operation. So the first project that was brought to me was a proposal to extend the existing co-housing scheme and develop a scheme for older people. So that was developed through Holton Senior Co-Housing Group. They are a company limited by guarantee. Their scheme consists of 20 units, 14 market homes, 6 affordable homes, all for over 55s, and a mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom properties. Something that's worth highlighting is that our grant funding does not prohibit funding to support market and affordable. We took the view that we didn't want to limit it just solely to affordable homes, because we expect that the scheme will still provide an element of affordable housing, as this one does. The second key thing that might be of interest to people is that we are not expecting the affordable units on this project to be owned and managed by an RP. The group are retaining ownership of the units and they will be managing themselves. Other key components, following the standards already achieved at the Lancaster Co-Housing Scheme, the homes will be Passive House standard, but will also achieve lifetime homes. And in terms of our contribution, as well as a 15k feasibility grant that we awarded fairly early on, we provided a grant of 160k towards pre-development costs. So that's scheme 1. Scheme 2 is different entirely. So we have Lune Valley Community Land Trust, who, when they initially became incorporated, they went through a process of deciding, do we want to do everything ourselves? Do we want to look at a partnership with an RP? They took the latter option because they don't necessarily want to limit their scheme to one scheme. If they can replicate this model elsewhere, they would be keen to do that. They went through their own selection process to identify a suitable RP. Their RP of choice was South Lakes Housing, who were just over the border from us. To inform how that scheme was going to be delivered, the council provided funding to undertake a parish survey. We used ARC4, who had done the district-wide survey for us. Again, this is a scheme that's delivering another 20 units of housing, but will be 100% affordable housing with some shared ownership and rented properties. In terms of the specification of these homes, again, there will be Passive House accredited, and the group, in terms of the standards, they wanted to exceed nationally described space standards, so they'll be plus 5%. Both schemes are currently in, they've been submitted for planning. This one does require capital funding through Homes England, so the bid is in, but we need the new programme to actually guarantee the funding from Homes England. So in terms of the enabling work that the City Council did, in terms of the grant funding, we used a blend of funding to support this scheme. So the group were looking for a grant towards the pre-development costs, which came directly from the Community Housing Fund. And in terms of acquiring the site, both sites are in private ownership. We actually used a commuted sums payment, and we got approval through Cabinet, subject to the scheme through planning. So just to give you an idea of the relationships, the picture that I showed you of Lancaster Co-housing, that's the bottom right, and then we have Halton Mill in between, and then we have the two co-located sites. It's the only part of Halton Mills that is undeveloped. And as you can see, the middle scheme, which is the Loon Valley scheme, is adjacent to existing market housing with the senior co-housing extension on the right. Worth pointing out that without boring everybody with the details, there is no other affordable housing on Halton Mills, and that was one of the key drivers for the groups actually taking these schemes forward, because they recognised that there was a need and that people that couldn't afford conventional market housing would still want to take advantage of some of the benefits of community-led. So in terms of just a quick recap, why did we do it? Why have we done it? Well, we were fortunate because we got a pot of money that we could use to bring this all to fruition. Clearly, with the standards of housing that are being provided, it's a great local opportunity for people that are in housing need, and to increase the supply of housing options for older people. It's going to be a fantastic learning opportunity for the City Council, because it's doing everything that we would want to do in terms of developing new housing going forward. I'm sure that if it's a positive experience for South Lakes Housing, they will want to do and achieve similar schemes elsewhere, but it will obviously give confidence to other partner RPs to try and hit these standards. And in terms of the tendering process, we don't have an identified developer yet. That's likely to be coming to fruition fairly imminently. And I think out of the developers who have expressed an interest in the tendering process, only one of them has built a passive house before. So clearly there is a great opportunity there to increase local developer skills and knowledge. And, you know, summing up to what I said right at the beginning, community-led housing, these are 40 properties. It may be a small number, but strategically it's really important to us and links directly to our climate change agenda.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And I can see that Councillor Fraser shared a link to the development as well on there, which is really helpful. There's a lot in there, and we're running a couple of minutes late, so I'm not going to put the questions to you, but Kathy, that I think there'll be people on the line who might want more information about this. Is it all right if we can suggest that people contact you if they've got any other questions about
Absolutely.
this?
Absolutely, no problem.
There's so much in there, and I'm sure people will want to talk to you about how you've achieved all that, and it's just a fantastic development. So I'm sure we're all quite envious of that. But thank you for your time today. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we're moving on to Sam from 13 Group. So Sam Granger is the Senior Environmental Manager at 13, and she's going to talk to us about 13's approach to net zero and the importance of building an organisation-specific approach to climate change. And I can see your slides are up already, so I'll just hand straight over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, as Karen said, my name's Sam Granger. My video, sorry. I'm leading the environmental and sustainability team here at 13 and leading on the development of our approach to decarbonisation. For those of you who don't know us, 13 are a social landlord predominantly in the northeast. We also have a housing developing arm, and we develop homes for both rent and for sale. We've got about 34,000 homes in our stock and are delivering services to about 70,000 customers. This slide just demonstrates our operating area to you. You can see that we have properties located as far north as North Tyneside and as far south as York, but the majority of our stock is located within the Tees Valley area. We began to look at our approach to environmental sustainability and reducing our environmental impacts back in early 2019. We've taken time since then to really get an understanding of what our responsibilities are as a landlord and a developer, looking at all of the existing and emerging regulations, the white papers that have been coming out, and looking at what that means for us both as a business and a provider of homes. We've also been looking at our responsibilities as a large organisation. There are certain regulations that we've needed to comply with, such as the energy climate regulations, such as the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. We were required to submit under that back in December 2019, so that saw us looking at all of our energy consumption across the group and also our transport. It gave us some early indications as to what our environmental impacts are with regards to emissions. And since then, we've also reported in line with SECR for our baseline carbon footprint for 2019-20, again giving us further insight into what we need to do as a business to reduce our emissions. We've also taken some time to understand our stakeholder expectations, the increased political focus on the climate agenda, looking at climate emergency and what we need to do to not just reduce our emissions, but look at our wider environmental impacts. And whilst doing all that, we've also needed to have a very strong focus on our customers. If we're going to do anything that's going to change the way we're delivering services, the way we're delivering our business, we need to think about what that means for them. Also bearing in mind, you know, the impact of our customers with the energy costs, fuel poverty, etc. We need to know what we're doing and considering what impact that's going to have on our approach. So the approach we've taken has been to develop our Take Control campaign. The ethos behind this campaign is very much about everybody at 13 taking control of our environmental impacts, about it not just being a specific team or a specific person who needs to have an take control, it's about everybody in the organisation, both across our colleagues, but also across our stakeholders, our partners, and working with everybody to make sure they have an understanding of the part they have to play to help to reduce these impacts. So we've been working to develop a priority action plan, and that plan is focusing on our, not just, as I say, how we get to reduce our emissions, but also our wider environmental impact. We're looking at it in a business lens, through a homes lens, and also through that of our customers. So within our business, we're developing a top-down approach whereby environmental impacts are considered as part of all of our business making decisions. We're taking time to understand the existing environmental impacts of our business and then looking at what we need to do to reduce them. We're taking time to educate and empower our staff to understand the impacts and also have a wider understanding of what climate emergency is, why there is a need to respond to climate change. Basically just so we can take them on that journey with us so they understand why we're making these changes and why it's important for them to get on the journey. We're going to be working with our stakeholders, ensure anybody that we're working with, anyone we're partnering with, understands and is able to support our approach. When it comes to our homes, we're looking at developing a roadmap to decarbonise all of our stock, both our existing stock that we have now. We need to look at reducing the environmental impacts, but also developing a standard for any new stock that we're bringing into the portfolio, or stock we're developing ourselves, but also stock we may be purchasing. We're also looking at what this means for our green spaces, thinking about biodiversity. Where are we now? What is the quality of our existing spaces? What can we do to protect what we already have there? But also what can we do to add value in the future, and also provide open spaces for our communities to engage in environmental activities, etc. And then, as I say, all of this needs to be done with our customers in mind. We're building a customer engagement framework, looking at how we can both empower our customers to understand the need for their behaviours to change and for them to be able to reduce their environmental impacts, but also for them to be able to embrace the changes that we're going to need to make in our stock. So where we're going to be delivering investment, we'll need our customers to go on that journey with us and be accepting of the changes that we're going to need to make to the stock, in order that they can take benefit from that. And increase, looking at ways that we can increase their health and well-being, reducing fuel poverty, and basically put more money in their pockets whilst helping them to reduce their environmental impacts. So what does this mean when it comes to climate emergency? Well, as I said at the beginning, we operate across a wide area. We operate within numerous local authorities, more than 20, I think, at my last count, which means that we're working with partners who have a variety of targets that they're working towards, a variety of focus. So for 13, we've decided that really we need to look at what's right for us in order that we can support our stakeholders on their journey, but make sure that anything that we're doing and anything that we're changing and anything that we're targeting ourselves with is right and achievable. We've looked at our emissions in two ways, really. We've looked at our direct business emissions, so those are the emissions that are being delivered, arising from the delivery of our business activities. These are the emissions that fall within scope 1 and 2 of the carbon footprint, so the heating of our buildings, the running of our offices, the use of our fleet vehicles. And we've taken some time to really understand what that baseline position looks like. As I said earlier, the submission with ESOS and then our declaration with SECR has really helped us to understand what the data is showing us. And that's helped us to develop a really informed approach. So we know where our emission hotspots are. We know what our limitations are with our services and where we need to work. And that's really helped us to set some priority actions and some appropriate targets. So at the moment, our high-level net zero target for our direct emissions is 2035. We do have some incremental targets underneath that. That is the date that we're looking at working towards at the moment. For our stock, it is slightly more complicated. As others have alluded to, the decarbonisation of stock is a really big piece of work. We're looking at a 30-year investment plan here. We've got 34,000 stock, but they're not all the same. They're all at different levels. We're fortunate in that the majority of our stock already reaches EPC level C, but our ambition is to take our stock to a passive level. In order to do that, we're taking time basically to understand what our position is now and what the cost would be to take us to that decarbonisation point. We've engaged with Savills, they've been conducting an independent survey with us, and as part of that they are looking at the cost. We're then going to be developing an approach to understand what that looks like for each of the different home types that we have, what technologies are going to be needed to move us towards that passive standard. To enable our thoughts with that, we have continued to deliver renewables. We have a large retrofit project program, and we've been delivering a lot of air source heat pumps and PV installations to our properties over the last few years, taking advantage of funding where we can. We've also developed some innovation pilots, a number of properties where we've taken void properties and used them to pilot innovative ways of changing the U value of the property, reducing the heat demand, and different heating and lighting systems. So all of this has come to help us with our informed approach. We need now to start looking at what this means for the supply chain, both the ability for them to deliver what we need, and also their availability, both in skills and the technology. We'd like to work with the supply chain to further develop the technology that we'd like to see installed in the homes. Rather than taking what's on the market now, we feel it would be good to work with the supply chain to let them know what the issues are that we have to overcome. We have some difficult to treat properties that the technology answers aren't there for us now. How can we support them to develop what we need? And at the same time, we need to look at the customer focus. As I've said, we've done a lot of renewables and retrofit programs across over the years, and the success of them has been led by the customer uptake. So where we've had engaged customers, we've had success. Where customers have been more hesitant, we've not found as much success. So we're very much focused on ensuring that our customers come on this journey with us, developing that framework whereby we have that upfront conversation with them. We take them on the journey. We don't end up with customers living in spaceships that they can't control and they're not able to reap the benefits from. We need to make sure that customers are able to live in these properties and that it's good for their well-being. So in summary, I just wanted to summarise what I feel that we need to do as a sector in order to be able to deliver and reach these targets. The first one is to understand our stock. We've heard a lot today about the need for funding and the need for the supply chain. I think as a sector, we need to be upfront in our understanding of where we are with our stock, what we want to do with it and where we want to take them, how we want to get there. That way we can then support the development of the supply chain for them to bring to market the things that we need. And also for government to have a clear understanding of what funding we actually need and want. We need to have long-term funding. Go back to the conversations with the first presenter, is that if we don't have that long-term view, it's difficult for us to plan that 30-year plan and plan out that investment. We also need to be investing in the workforce. We need to be looking at upskilling our workforce, both in understanding of the climate emergency and why we need to respond, but also ensuring that we've got the skills both in-house and in the supply chain to deliver the technology that we need, but also to maintain it in the future. And that is all from me. Those are my contact details if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, there are a few questions coming in for you. I'll just have a quick look at them. I mean, one of the questions is around, you talked about it, but engagement with customers and your direct engagement with customers. And I suppose I want to add to that, and you referred to it in terms of resistance from customers and, not necessarily understanding or wanting an air source heat pump in their houses, and any work you've done on that and suggestions you've got on that.
The more success we've had is where we've been in a position that we've been able to take a void property within an area and actually install the systems ahead of doing the actual retrofits. So where we can actually then, put the house back together, because obviously it requires some work. But then you can take the customers in, use it as a show home, show them how the heating works, show them how the systems work. We had a scheme down in Newport in Middlesbrough where the void property was actually on the street that that other houses were going to be getting the same technology, and they were able to see the home through every stage as well, of how the piping went in, how the system was fitted. They were invited to come and see, at different stages, and we found that really helped. We then, through that process, trained the neighbourhood coordinators, the lettings officers, the frontline staff who are actually going to be working with the customers as well, because sometimes that we don't have the skills in-house that on the front line that know how the systems work. That can sometimes prevent or cause issues with customers, obviously when you have a turnover as well.
Yeah. I think you're actually taking part in one of our future webinars on home energy, aren't you? So if anyone wants to on that.
Our renewables manager, Wes, who's led on most of these. Yes, he'll have lots of information on that.
Yeah, if I can just ask a question about you take control, which sounds very ambitious to include everyone, but obviously essential and necessary to get that transformational change. And someone has asked a question about procurement, and I think you talked about it already, but how that's changed your relationships with contractors and suppliers, because that might be one of the most difficult aspects of change.
At the moment, we've not started working with our suppliers. As such, we've been quite internally focused. We've been concentrating up till now on our on engaging with our staff internally. We've just started conversations with one of our framework providers in pulling together a renewables framework, and we're also looking at setting up a stakeholder kind of promise, so that anybody who does contract with us, we will be looking at them to work with us on our Take Control campaign.
Yeah. Okay. Someone's asking you a question about the government green grant scheme and if you have any views on the process to complete the bid templates.
I've not looked at them yet.
Sam, I think we're right on time now. So we've managed to fit a few of the questions in there. But again, I assume you're okay if anyone has any follow-ups to that. And like I say, you will be doing one of our future webinars. So there'll be much more information coming forward from you on this, on home energy particularly. Are you actually stopping with gas central heating? Is that built into your plans in terms of the heating? Is that...
We are keeping our options open at the moment, but the plan would be to move towards move away from gas central heating as our standard, if I'm honest. Yeah.
I was just interested. Thank you very much. That was really informative, and again, we can follow up any other questions people have got if you want more detail or help from you on what you've managed to achieve or what your ambitions are there, which are really exciting over that period of time. So good luck with that. And that's all of our speakers today. And I won't do a long conclusion because we're right on time, but I think that's given us lots to think about. And that's, as I say, the very first of our webinars. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Liam, who's just going to do a tiny little bit of promotion about what we're coming up at the next the next session. So Liam, do you want to big up our next webinar?
Hi everyone. Yes, I will. Just while everyone's filing out, I did have all the information on a presentation, but I've managed to close it at just the wrong time. So next week we'll have we'll be looking at asset management and the implications of energy efficiency on asset management strategies. We'll have Campbell Tickell and Urbed, who are architects and surveyors, looking at the sort of the policy side of things, but also those technical considerations. After that, the week after, on the 23rd, I believe, we'll have financing energy efficiency, and we'll be looking at the green finance agenda around environmental sustainability in government arrangements. And from there, we'll have two webinars closely looking at home retrofit. The first week, we'll be looking at policy challenges and Fabric First. The second week, home energy systems. And from there, I'll include all the information in our follow-up emails to yourselves. The presentations today will be going on our website alongside a recording, and we'll be getting questions that weren't able to be answered to our presenters, and they'll hopefully be able to answer those, and we'll put that in front of everyone as well. So thank you everyone for taking part. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you at the next session. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.